I have absolutely no particular reason to make this video other than this kind of thing has been on my mind. And I actually have some insight to share because I see comments and reactions to things where people, I'm not going to say necessarily ask the questions I'm about to give answers to, but they seem to lack a certain amount of understanding about corporate structure. Now, I myself am, at the time of this filming, not currently employed. I am covering my bills as best I can through my Patreon, link in the description, please help me out. Anyways, I worked in corporate environments for the vast majority of my working life. And for the last 9.5 years, I worked in a company that became increasingly corporate as time went on. And my insight into that and the process and how the business changed over time has actually given me a lot of insight into the nature of corporate approaches and corporate growth. And while the company I worked for was not an entertainment company, it was in no way involved in anything like that, it made physical stuff and sold it, I do see how this mentality affects things like movie studios and video game production and things of that nature. So, let's have a little insight. Ultimately, if you've ever watched my live streams, then you've probably heard me mention at some point along the way that my biggest issue with these systems, i.e. capitalism, is investors and the nature of investors. Because if you don't already know this, any company that has investors, which is virtually every company, certainly anything that's bigger than a local mom and pop corner store, they are the customer. The investor is. That is who they are trying to please. The consumer, the person who is purchasing whatever it is the company makes, is not the customer. The company doesn't care if they are happy. Ideally, they'd like them to be, but if they have to choose between having their customers be happy and having their investors be happy, the investors take priority because that is the real customer. So, how does this manifest? Well, here's the thing about investment. Because of investment, as soon as it is injected into a business, it is no longer enough for a business simply to be profitable, i.e. to generate more revenue than it spent in a year. That is being profitable. If you bring in more money than it costs you to run your business, you have made a profit, good for you. But if you have investors, that is not enough. It is not enough to simply be profitable. You have to be more profitable than you were last year. And last year better have been more profitable than the year before. Investors demand growth because they demand return on investment. They've injected money into your business for shares in the business, and the way they earn more money back is by the business growing and those shares becoming worth more. So it now is not just about did we make more than we spent, it's did we make more than we made last year. And depending on how a corporation chooses to fudge its numbers, because they all do, it may not even matter if it's profitable. They may be basing their projections strictly off of raw gross income. Some may be focused more on the margins. They will focus on whatever it is they can produce the best numbers for. But there has to be, whatever numbers they choose to focus on, whether it's margin, whether it's gross, whether it's net, they have to show growth in that area, ideally in all three, because that's what investors want. Now, if you think about this to a logical conclusion, there's a very obvious problem with this system. You can't grow forever. You cannot become bigger exponentially year over year over year. And any business, every business model, has a natural ceiling. There is a point at which you are making the most money that you can make off of what it is you do. And from there are a couple of options for how to keep getting bigger. If you've ever found yourself wondering why companies like Disney and Apple and AT&T acquire other businesses, it's because that's the fastest way for them to grow, or in some cases that might be the only way for them to grow. Because if they've hit their natural ceiling on what it is they do and they can't expect to keep growing themselves for their core business, a very easy way to boost year over year is to acquire a whole new company. The company that I worked for did this the year before I was let go. Well, let me back up. They had acquired a number of companies over the years, but most of them up to that point had been ones that we had been doing some level of business with, and it made a certain amount of logical sense to fold them in and bring them and take ownership of them and bring everything under the same umbrella. The year before I was let go, we acquired a company we'd never done any business with, I had never freaking heard of, but the reason why we acquired it became very clear very quickly. We acquired them towards the end of our fiscal year. However, what that meant was when it came time to report the revenue and the growth, that company's entire year of growth that they did, not even of growth, their entire year worth of just generating income, even before we got a hold of them, suddenly went on our books for our fiscal year. Their entire, I'm not going to throw out numbers, but every single bit of income that they brought in suddenly was on our books. And that was income we didn't have last year. That was instant growth as far as the numbers were concerned. That is a big part of why companies like Disney buy Marvel and Lucasfilm. And the reason is not because they're trying to take over the world, it's because Disney has hit probably the natural ceiling on what it does, i.e. producing family-friendly entertainment and running some business models specific around that, like the Disney Channel, now Disney Plus. There's only so much more growth they can get out of that. But the best way to keep getting bigger is to acquire whole new companies. And you not only do you get whatever they are worth immediately on your books, if they are further away from their natural ceiling, well, their growth is going to power through and trickle down for the whole overall corporate structure. So that's the first thing. This also factors into, and this is part of why it was on my mind lately, you know how certain large publishers in the video game industry have a habit of not only purchasing developers, but then shutting them down fairly soon after? Well, that's the other thing. If you acquire a company that does not have a lot of growth opportunities, after that first year where you've acquired them and you've had the huge boost of whatever they're worth to your books, if they, as a subdivision, don't keep growing year over year, suddenly they become a drag. And it becomes better for you to close them down and liquidate assets and take that money and ditch the expenses. And that is why companies like EA will repeatedly purchase smaller developers only to then shut them down a few years later, basically as soon as they create their first bomb, usually at the behest of EA, who is now dictating what they do. So this is the state of things. The fact that investors demand growth every year, you have to bring in more money than you brought in the year before, is at the heart of so much of what is going on. Of the consolidation of businesses, the swallowing up of smaller businesses by larger ones, both to bolster their own business model or to shut them down afterwards, either because they're seen as competition or just because, well, we got the initial boost off them, we have no more use for them, go away. I'm not saying the rest of capitalism is blameless. I'm not. But I'm saying that my working experience has given me insight into this specific element of capitalism. Investment. What it does to companies, and then what companies do in an effort to try and keep investors happy. That is where basically everyone except the investor starts getting screwed over. The employees get screwed over, the consumer gets screwed over. On a long enough timeline, it's possible even for the company that is pleasing the investors for them to get screwed over or to screw themselves over in an effort to please the investors. It's a disaster. And it's a business model and it's a problem created by a business model that is just going to keep getting worse. And I've known this for a long time. One of my first jobs when I was in college was at Barnes & Noble. And I remember being bowled over when in December, somebody from the district corporate level came to our store and said 2 sentences back to back that blew my mind. You just had your biggest December ever, but it was below the projections we expected, so we consider this a failure. We'd had the most successful, and December's a very busy month, or it was at the time, at Barnes & Noble. We'd had the most successful December ever, but it didn't meet the growth projections they'd made, so it was still considered a failure. We were a failing store because we didn't grow enough. And like I said, at the time that blew my mind. I wish I had realized that I had just gotten a snapshot of what every corporate job I would ever have was going to be. So, there's a little insight for you. I don't know if anyone will care about this. I don't know if I'm ranting into the wind, but I needed to get this on the record in one place. It's the kind of thing I've been spouting here and there in bits and pieces. Let's consolidate this, get this off my chest, and maybe I can move on, at least for a little bit. Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Usual stuff. Like, subscribe, share this around if you feel it's worth hearing. Not to mention, or to mention again, rather, I do have a Patreon, and that is what is currently keeping the lights on and covering my bills. Although not completely covering my bills. I'm working on that. So, all that would be appreciated, but you also don't have to. Because end of the day, you're the council, and I just run the meetings. So until next time, this council is adjourned.